The elf and the prince, the kingdom of Aurelis was veiled in sorrow, its skies perpetually overcast, as if mourning alongside its people. The once vibrant court was muted, servants tiptoeing through dim corridors, their whispers like ghosts in the halls. At the heart of the palace, King Eldric lay bedridden, his health fading with each passing day. No healer, potion, or prayer could halt the mysterious ailment that had taken root within him. Prince Adrien, the king's only son, knelt in the royal chapel, the flickering candlelight casting shadows across his resolute face. He clutched a worn scroll in his trembling hands, its contents written in an ancient script that spoke of salvation, a sacred relic hidden deep within the forbidden forest. The relic, said to be a shard of divine light, held the power to heal even the gravest of afflictions. But the forest was a place of dread, whispered about in taverns and around hearthfires. Travelers who dared its boundaries spoke of shifting paths, whispering trees, and the enigmatic guardian who dwelled within, an elf whose clever tricks and merciless tests had thwarted all who sought passage. Still, Adrien was undeterred. Clad in his father's armor, a family heirloom gleaming faintly despite the years, he departed under the cover of twilight. His sword, known as Luminara, hummed softly at his side, its light a guiding star in the encroaching darkness. The forest greeted him like an unwelcoming host. The air grew colder, and the world outside seemed to vanish as he crossed the threshold. The trees loomed impossibly tall, their twisted branches knitting a canopy so thick that sunlight dared not enter. Each step seemed louder than the last, the crunch of leaves beneath his boots echoing unnaturally. "Prince Adrien!" A melodic voice called from nowhere and everywhere. Adrien halted, gripping the hilt of his sword. The voice was tinged with amusement, as though its owner found his presence laughable. "Why does the heir of Aurelis trespass in my domain?" Adrien turned, searching the shadows, but found no one. "I seek the relic," he said firmly, "to save my father and my kingdom." A soft laugh echoed, light as a breeze through the leaves. "Many have sought it, none have succeeded." "I will not fail," Adrien declared, his voice steady despite the unease prickling at his spine. The laughter grew closer, sharper, until it coalesced into a figure perched upon a low-hanging branch. Sylvaris. The elf's eyes gleamed like polished emeralds, and their slight frame seemed almost weightless. They wore a smirk that danced between mockery and intrigue. "Bold words," Sylvaris said, swinging down from the branch and landing without a sound. "But boldness alone won't serve you here. The forest is alive, Prince. It listens, it watches, and it judges. So do I." Adrien inclined his head, a gesture of respect. Then I must gain your trust. Tell me what I must do. Sylvaris tilted their head, examining him as though he were a puzzle missing its most vital piece. Do you think it's that simple? A test or two, and I'll let you waltz to the relic? No, little prince. Trust is earned in fragments, not whole. Before Adrien could respond, Sylvaris snapped their fingers, and the forest shifted around them. The trees rearranged themselves, their roots curling into unfamiliar patterns, forming a path that seemed to lead nowhere. Find me? Sylvaris said, their voice echoing as their form dissolved into mist. Adrien was left alone, the forest now a maze of endless green and shadow. The path ahead twisted unnaturally, vanishing into darkness. Somewhere in the distance, a faint laugh carried on the wind. The prince gripped Luminara, its faint glow a small comfort in the consuming dark. His resolve hardened. He had stepped into this forest, knowing it might cost him everything. What he didn't know was how much the forest and the elf would demand before it was through. With a steady breath, Adrien took his first step into the labyrinth, his faith and courage his only guides. The forest seemed to breathe, its dense air pressing down like an unseen hand. Adrien walked cautiously, every step deliberate, his sword's glow barely piercing the encroaching shadows. The path Sylvaris had conjured shifted underfoot, its twists and turns defying logic. Adrien's thoughts lingered on the elf's parting words. Find me. As he ventured deeper, the oppressive silence was broken by faint, haunting whispers. They seemed to emanate from the very trees, their voices overlapping in a dissonant chorus. Adrien halted, straining to decipher the words. Who seeks, yet knows not what they seek? The voices coalesced into a single question, spoken with the cadence of wind through leaves. I seek the relic, Adrien replied, his voice steady despite the chill that crept into his bones. A soft chuckle rippled through the air, unmistakably Sylvaris's. No, prince, you seek salvation, but you've yet to understand its cost. Prove your worth, or the forest will claim you. Before Adrien could respond, the ground beneath him shifted. The path crumbled away, replaced by a circular clearing surrounded by ancient trees whose bark glowed faintly with runes. In the center stood a pedestal of stone, and atop it lay a silver hourglass, its sands shimmering like captured starlight. Sylvaris appeared in a flicker of light, perched atop the pedestal with a playful smirk. Your first test, they said, gesturing to the hourglass. Solve the riddle before the final grain falls. Fail, and the forest will decide your fate. Adrien stepped forward, his hand instinctively tightening around Luminara's hilt. Speak your riddle, he said firmly. Sylvaris leaned forward, their eyes gleaming with mischief. I speak without a mouth and hear without ears. I have no body, but I come alive with the wind. What am I? The hourglass flipped on its own, the silver sands beginning to flow. Adrien's mind raced, the elf's words echoing in his head. The whispering trees, the eerie stillness, everything in this forest seemed to speak in riddles. He glanced at the hourglass, its sands spilling faster than seemed natural. An echo, he said, the answer blooming in his mind like a sudden light. Sylvaris clapped slowly, their smirk softening into something that resembled approval. Not bad, Prince. Perhaps you're not as dull as most mortals. Before Adrien could respond, the pedestal dissolved and the clearing darkened. The forest reformed around him, and Sylvaris vanished again, their laugh lingering like a fading melody. The second test began without warning. Adrien found himself surrounded by mist, its tendrils curling around him like grasping hands. Images materialized in the haze, scenes from his deepest fears. He saw his father's throne room, empty and cold, the crown resting atop the king's robes as though they had been abandoned. He saw the people of Aurelis, their faces turned away in silent accusation. He saw himself, alone in the forest, the relic forever out of reach. The whispers returned, this time sharper, crueler. You are too weak. You will fail, as all before you have failed. Adrien stumbled, his knees threatening to give way under the weight of the visions. He clutched at his chest, his breath shallow. The sword at his side seemed to dim, its glow struggling against the suffocating darkness. Enough, he shouted, his voice cracking but resolute. I will not be broken by shadows and lies. The mist hesitated, as if startled by his defiance. Adrien straightened, his grip on Lumina firm. You may show me my fears, but they will not stop me. I walk with faith, not feared. The mist recoiled, dissipating into the night. Adrien stood alone once more, his heartbeat steadying as the forest grew still. A faint rustle behind him signaled Sylvaris's return. You surprise me, Prince, the elf said, their tone quieter, almost contemplative. Few make it this far. Adrien turned to face them, his gaze unwavering. I will not fail, not for myself, but for my father and my people. Sylvaris tilted their head, studying him as if seeing him anew. We shall see, they said, their voice carrying a note of something Adrien could not place. Respect, perhaps, or pity. With a snap of their fingers, Sylvaris vanished once more, leaving Adrien to ponder what lay ahead. Though he had passed the tests, he sensed that the true trial was yet to come. The forest, alive and watchful, seemed to hum with anticipation. As Adrien resumed his journey, the weight of his mission pressed upon him, but so too did the flicker of hope. He had earned a fragment of trust, but he knew that in this enchanted realm, even fragments could shift the tides of fate. The forest's darkness had deepened, though Adrien couldn't tell if night had fallen or if the trees themselves had thickened their canopy. The air was heavier now, filled with an ancient energy that pressed against his senses. The silence had changed, no longer oppressive but waiting, as though the forest was holding its breath. Sylvaris appeared again, this time without warning. One moment the path was empty, and the next, the elf stood before Adrien, leaning against a gnarled tree with an expression that teetered between amusement and weariness. "You've made it further than most," Sylvaris said, their voice softer than before. The mocking edge dulled. "But I wonder, do you even understand what you're chasing?" Adrien frowned, gripping Luminara tighter. "I seek the relic to save my father and my kingdom. That is all I need to understand." Sylvaris tilted their head, the faint glow of the runes on their skin catching the dim light. "Do you truly believe the relic's power is so simple, that you can pluck it from its resting place and wield it without consequence?" Adrien hesitated, the weight of their words stirring doubts he had kept buried. But he pushed them aside. "I will face whatever consequences come. I have no choice." Sylvaris studied him for a long moment, then turned away, gesturing for Adrien to follow. "Then walk with me. It's time you learn the truth of what you seek." The path they took was unlike any Adrien had seen in the forest. The trees stood taller here, their bark glowing faintly with runes that pulsed like heartbeats. The air shimmered, charged with an energy that made Adrien's skin prickle. "This forest was not always what it is," Sylvaris began, their tone measured, almost reverent. "Long ago, it was a place of unity, where mortals and the magical kind walked side by side. The relic was forged in those days, a gift from the heavens, a shard of pure light meant to bind our worlds together." Adrien listened intently, the weight of their words pressing against his chest. "But unity is a fragile thing," Sylvaris continued, their voice hardening. "Mortals grew greedy, as they often do. They sought to claim the relic's power for themselves, to bend it to their will. In their arrogance, they broke the balance. And the forest, the relic's guardian, rose to protect what they could not." They stopped abruptly, turning to face Adrien. Their emerald eyes glinted with an intensity that made him falter. "Do you see now? The relic is not some tool to be wielded. It is a living force, a fragment of divinity. To take it is to risk unraveling the delicate threads that hold this realm together." Adrien's voice was quiet when he finally spoke. "Then why allow me to come this far? Why test me if you believe my cause is doomed? Sylvaris's expression softened, a shadow of something akin to sorrow passing over their features. Because the forest has chosen you, Prince. It sees something in you that I do not. Perhaps you are different, or perhaps you are simply the last in a long line of fools. They reached a clearing bathed in an otherworldly light. At its center stood an ancient tree, its trunk wide enough to hold a castle, its roots twisting deep into the earth like the veins of the forest itself. Hanging from one of its branches was a crystalline orb that pulsed with a gentle glow, the relic. Adrien's breath caught at the sight of it. He stepped forward, but Sylvaris held out a hand, stopping him. This is where your journey truly begins, they said. The relic will not simply allow itself to be taken, it will demand something of you, something you may not be willing to give. What will it ask? Adrien asked, his voice steady despite the unease curling in his gut. Sylvaris shook their head. I cannot say. The relic speaks in ways beyond even my understanding. But know this, Prince, whatever it demands, it will reveal the truth of who you are. Adrien met the elf's gaze, the weight of their words settling over him like a mantle. He turned back to the relic, its light pulsing like a heartbeat, and took a deep breath. I have come this far, he said quietly, more to himself than to Sylvaris. I will not falter now. The elf said nothing, their expression inscrutable. But as Adrien stepped toward the relic, Sylvaris's hand fell to their side, and for the first time they did not try to stop him. The clearing seemed to hold its breath as Adrien approached the ancient tree, the relic's glow intensifying with each step. Somewhere behind him, Sylvaris whispered, their voice barely audible. May the forest have mercy on you, Prince. And with that, Adrien reached for the relic, the light swallowing him whole. As Adrien's fingers brushed the relic, the world shifted. The forest vanished, replaced by a vast expanse of blinding light. He stood in a place that felt infinite, where time and space were meaningless. The relic hovered before him, its glow pulsating with an almost sentient rhythm. A voice, deep and resonant, filled the void. It was not Sylvaris's voice, nor did it belong to any mortal tongue. It was a voice that spoke to the soul, bypassing words and filling Adrien's mind with understanding. Prince of Aurelis, you stand before the light eternal. Speak your truth. Why have you come? Adrien straightened, his heart steady despite the overwhelming presence. I have come to save my father, he said, his voice strong. And my kingdom. Without him, Aurelis will fall to ruin. The relic's light flared, casting shadows that seemed to ripple with unspoken questions. The voice returned, quieter now, as if testing his resolve. You seek salvation for your bloodline. But what of the cost? Will you offer what is required? Adrien hesitated. What is it you ask of me? The voice did not answer with words. Instead, images filled his mind, memories of his life, moments of triumph and failure, love and loss. Then, a shadow of something yet to come. A vision of himself standing alone, his father's crown upon his head, a kingdom rebuilt, but at the expense of something he could not yet name. The relic pulsed again, its light now warm and inviting. The cost is yourself, Prince Adrien. A fragment of your soul, given freely to mend what is broken. Only through sacrifice can you hold this power. Adrien's heart pounded. He had prepared for trials of strength and courage. But this, thought of giving up a part of himself, of losing something so intrinsic, terrified him. Yet as he stood in the infinite light, he thought of his father lying pale and weak, of the people waiting for their king to return, of the whispers of despair that had begun to creep through the kingdom. He clenched his fists, the weight of his choice settling over him like a mantle. If my soul is the price of hope, then I will pay it, he said, his voice resolute. Not for power, but for those who cannot stand without me. The relic pulsed once more, brighter than ever before. The voice returned softer now, almost reverent. You have chosen the path of selflessness. Step forward and let the bond be made. Adrien moved without hesitation, placing both hands on the relic. A searing light engulfed him, and he cried out as he felt something deep within him being drawn away. A warmth, a piece of his essence, leaving an emptiness that would never fully heal. When the light receded, Adrien found himself back in the forest clearing. The ancient tree still loomed above him, but its glow had dimmed, as if it too had given part of itself to the relic. In Adrien's hands the relic now rested, its crystalline surface cool and alive with a faint inner light. Sylvaris stood at the edge of the clearing, their expression unreadable. For the first time, the elf's playful smirk was absent, replaced by something akin to awe. You did it, Sylvaris said, their voice quiet. You gave it what it needed. Adrien nodded, though he felt no triumph, only an aching emptiness. Will it heal my father? Sylvaris stepped closer, their gaze fixed on the relic. The relic is yours now. Its power will answer your heart's call, but remember this, Adrien. What you've given cannot be undone. You carry the mark of the forest now. Its burden will follow you. Adrien met their gaze, the weight of his sacrifice settling over him. If it saves my people, it is a burden I will bear. Sylvaris's expression softened, and for the first time they bowed their head. Then you have my respect, Prince of Aurelis. Few mortals would give so freely. As Adrien turned to leave the clearing, the forest seemed to part for him, the trees bowing as if in deference. The path to the kingdom lay open, the relic's glow lighting the way. But as he walked, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was leaving part of himself behind, a piece of his soul forever entwined with the forest's ancient magic. And though he had gained the relic, he knew that his journey had only just begun. Behind him, Sylvaris watched in silence, their gaze following Adrien until he disappeared into the trees. "May the forest guide you, little prince," they murmured, their voice carried away by the wind. The return journey through the forest felt different. The oppressive darkness had lifted, and the trees seemed alive in a new way. Not with menace, but with a quiet reverence. Their branches arched overhead like a cathedral ceiling, and the whispers in the wind carried no riddles, only songs of farewell. Adrien clutched the relic close, its gentle glow casting an ethereal light that seemed to guide his steps. He could feel its power pulsing faintly, a heartbeat that resonated with his own. Yet within him, the emptiness left by his sacrifice lingered, a quiet void where a fragment of his soul once resided. Sylvaris appeared once more at the forest's edge, leaning against a tree with an inscrutable expression. "You've reached the threshold," they said, their voice lacking its usual mockery. "Beyond this point, the forest no longer protects you." Adrien turned to face the elf, his gaze steady. "Will we meet again?" Sylvaris considered this for a moment, their emerald eyes gleaming. "Perhaps. You've left a part of yourself here, after all. The forest never forgets those who give it life." For the first time, Sylvaris extended a hand. Adrien hesitated, then clasped it firmly. "Thank you," he said simply. Sylvaris smiled faintly, a rare and fleeting expression. "Farewell, Prince Adrien. May your choice bring more light than shadow." As Adrien emerged from the forest, the world seemed brighter, more vivid, as though the relic's glow had spilled into the very air around him. The journey back to Aurelis passed in a blur, the weight of his mission driving him forward. When he arrived at the palace gates, the guards gasped at the sight of him, their eyes drawn to the relic in his hands. Whispers rippled through the courtyard as Adrien strode through, his steps resolute. The relic's light cast long shadows, illuminating the faces of those who had begun to lose hope. In the king's chamber, the air was heavy with sorrow. King Eldric lay motionless, his once vibrant presence reduced to a faint shadow. The court physician hovered nearby, shaking his head as Adrien approached. "Leave us," Adrien commanded, his voice firm yet quiet. The room emptied, leaving only father and son. Adrien knelt beside the bed, the relic cradled in his hands. Its light grew brighter as though it recognized the king's need. Adrien closed his eyes, his voice barely above a whisper. "I offer this light for my father. Let it heal what is broken." The relic pulsed, its glow intensifying until the entire room was bathed in its radiance. Adrien felt its power surge outward, filling the space with a warmth that brought tears to his eyes. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the king stirred. His chest rose and fell with deep, steady breaths, and color began to return to his cheeks. When his eyes opened, they were clear and bright, as though the illness had never touched him. "Adrien?" the king murmured, his voice strong but filled with wonder. Adrien grasped his father's hand, a flood of relief washing over him. "I am here, father. The relic has saved you." News of the king's recovery spread like wildfire, and the kingdom erupted into celebration. The relic's light had not only healed the king, but seemed to renew the very land itself. Crops flourished, the rivers sparkled with clarity, and the people's spirits were lifted as if touched by a divine hand. Yet Adrien felt no triumph. He stood on the palace balcony, the relic now resting in a sacred chamber, its light a constant reminder of his sacrifice. The emptiness within him remained, a quiet ache that no celebration could fill. Sylvaris's words echoed in his mind. "What you've given cannot be undone." Months passed, and the kingdom thrived under the renewed reign of King Eldric. Yet Adrien could not forget the forest, nor the bond he now shared with it. He often wandered to its edge, where the trees seemed to lean toward him, as if remembering his presence. One day, as he stood there, a familiar laugh drifted through the air. Sylvaris emerged from the shadows, their expression unreadable. "You've done well, little prince," they said, their tone carrying a rare note of approval. "The forest sings of your deeds." Adrien inclined his head, a faint smile touching his lips. "And yet, the cost lingers." Sylvaris stepped closer, their gaze piercing. "That void within you is not loss, it is potential. You carry a piece of the forest now, Adrien. And one day, when the time comes, it will call to you again." With that, Sylvaris turned and disappeared into the trees, their form dissolving like mist. Adrien stood there for a long time, the weight of their words settling over him. As he returned to the castle, he felt the relic's light within him, not just as a burden, but as a part of something greater. He had forged a bridge between worlds, and though the price had been steep, he knew it was a miracle worth enduring. The forest's song lingered in his heart, a quiet promise of unity and the power of selfless sacrifice.